standards at Headlee and Prop A. We know that is a very big lift. What we're hoping to do today is to improve your understanding of Headlee and Prop A. So at the end of the night, we're going to check in with folks and see if we've achieved that. So that is our goal. There is not going to be a rush through the material. We expect questions along the way. We expect your engagement in the content. There is a chance, if we've gotten through enough and we're feeling pretty good with it, we may do a little table activity where we turn to our neighbors and do our best explanations, not to test you, but to surface points of confusion or additional questions. Because we, in order to have good opinions about Headlee and Prop A, or well, really Headlee for Ferndale, it's important that we understand it, okay? So that's what we're here to do today. There are no bad questions. If you have a question or aren't understanding something, I can almost guarantee you somebody else in the room is also wondering. So it is a gift to your colleagues to ask your questions, because then it means they don't have to. So please, good questions. All questions are good questions. And we are going to do an icebreaker. And the reason we're going to do an icebreaker is to warm us all up for this idea that we are not here to receive information. We are here to engage in content and learn together. And so we're going to go around, and everybody can participate in this, speakers, staff, everybody, and we're going to use our outdoor voices because it'll be hard to hear and we want to hear what everybody has to say. So please introduce yourself. I think it'll be helpful to the speakers for you to say your role, so if you're a task force member or if you're city staff, and say your favorite thing about a rainy afternoon. So Kara, we'll start with you.
Oh, goodness.
Outdoor voices.
Okay. I'm Kara. I'm the communications director for the city, and I think the best part about rainy afternoons is reading with a cat.
I'm Kimberly. I'm on the finance committee, and my favorite part about a rainy afternoon is honestly probably the same. I'm gonna steal that answer. It's probably the same.
Hello, my name is Dale. I won't say my last name. I'm on the finance committee. I was on the task force last summer. The best thing about a rainy afternoon is taking a nice long nap.
I'm Michael Lohmeier, Oakland County Equalization. I'm the Equalization Director for the county, and I love all afternoons, rainy, sunny, mornings, afternoons, all of them. And I would love the naps, no matter what. Love them.
Sure.
I'm Justin Gerlando, the HR manager. My favorite part, kind of with Dale, is hearing that rain hit off your windows, taking a nice nap in the afternoon. Good stuff.
I'm Lucia, I'm an assistant to the city manager. My favorite part about a rainy afternoon, probably having the window open and hearing all the sounds and smelling the smells.
Phil Whitfield, finance director. My favorite thing about a rainy afternoon is the setting effect. It's the perfect time to take a nap. Something about the rain is relaxing.
Thomas Floyd, finance committee. Favorite part would probably be wiping off my dog's muddy paws.
Joe Gotcha, city manager. Fireplace, book, blanket, beef stout, 10%. Nap.
I am Quinn Ziegler, the chair of the committee, and I am going to put another little checkbox next to the reading a book category.
Hi, I'm Jeffrey. I missed the first meeting. I was down with COVID and feeling better now. My favorite part about rainy afternoons is not having to water flowers.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I'm Dave Hoppy, finance committee, and my favorite part about the rainy afternoon is sitting on my porch and having a beer.
My name is Brooke. I'm part of the finance committee as well. Rainy afternoons, I actually like it when it stops raining and the smell of the wet grass. Don't love the smell of my wet dog. The first thing coming in, but yeah.
I'm on Ferndale City Council, and my favorite thing about a rainy day is a fire in the fireplace.
Roger Russo, being that Road Director, and my favorite thing is driving in puddles being wet.
I am Jim, Public Works Director for City of Ferndale. Don't really like rain that much, but, I don't know, I do like fires. I do like, the one thing I like about rain is typically it means the temperature comes down a little bit, and I'm not a deep person, so it is kind of nice to just feel that cool front come in.
Hi, I'm Robert Burks, I'm the Deputy Parks and Recreation Director, and my favorite part about rain afternoon, I would say the calming effect. Everyone tends to go inside and see like, wow, peaceful. That's my favorite.
Nice. Well, thank you all for indulging me. I'm going to turn it over to Joe. He's going to get us started with the content.
Okay, I hope this, oh, it does have an effect. Okay, it's working now. A couple things on introductions. I am, this meeting is not recorded with city stuff because it's not in the council chamber. So we're going to do our best to bootstrap a recording that we can then share out with your fellow committee members and also upload to the city's media for access by the public. So this is not live tonight. This is a taping using a very technical device called an iPhone. So we will be using an iPhone. And so when we speak tonight, if we could use the microphone, I know it's going to be inconvenient, but bear with us because it's going to be to the benefit of your committee members who aren't here to hear your questions and then to hear the answer. So if you have a question, we will be making space to ask those. If you could just come up and just make sure not to sit in front of the speaker so the speaker can get picked up by the phone. I'm also going to be pinch hitting as city clerk tonight. So with that, I will need some assistance, and I will do my best to kick off the agenda. Chair, if you're okay, we can do that. Okay, so I'm a bad city clerk because I don't have the roster list of last names in front of me. Shoot. Can someone bring your laptop up with the contact list? Thank you. Kara, can you confirm that the camera is on? Okay. Public, the meeting is now in session. We'll begin the meeting with roll call. Committee member Cimbelli. Here. Did I get that right? Cimbelli. Committee member Hoppy. Here. Committee member Lennox.
Here.
Committee member Loftus. Here. Committee member Lozano. Ready. Committee member Savoy. Here. Committee member Virolo.
Here.
Sorry, I do know how to do that.
Yeah, that was good.
And Chair Ziegler. I'm blind, I can't. Sorry. Committee member Baker. Not present. And committee member Gita. Not present. Okay. Okay. Chair, can you prompt a motion for approval of the agenda?
Sure. Can I get a motion to approve tonight's agenda as presented?
Second.
All right. Motion, and can I get a second?
Second.
Seconded by Dave. All in favor? We're not gonna do a roll call, we're just gonna all in favor, raise your hand.
Ayes have it.
Carries.
Through the chair, we do have a presentation to kick off tonight's agenda.
Do we need to do a motion to approve the minutes from last meeting?
That is on the agenda after following the presentation.
Thank you.
Sure. Through the chair, I will introduce our members from Oakland County. We do have members of Oakland County Equalization in attendance this evening. We'll begin, I'll let them introduce themselves professionally, but Michael, Lohmeier, and Bryan, if you guys can come up and introduce yourselves, your roles with the county, and then I will control the presentation from there.
Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. As I mentioned, I'm Michael Lohmeier. I'm the Equalization Director Officer at Oakland County Equalization. I actually came to Oakland County Equalization a little over a year ago. I came from City of Novi as the assessing officer. Prior to that, I served as city assessor for City of Auburn Hills. And prior to that, I worked in private appraisal. So I've been in practice for a good 35 plus. Okay, so prior to that, I served for 35 plus years in valuation and assessing administration. We do 32 and a half units because we still do City of Novi as assessor. We've got a deputy there that does a lot of heavy lifting, but we still serve as the assessor of record. We have 75 plus staff members at Oakland County Equalization, of which is also Mr. Bryan Paris, as he introduced himself. But he's also been with the county for 15, 20 plus years, and he also has a private appraisal background. So we both have strong valuation background, but also a strong assessing administration background. And one of the things we both have in common is we both have a passion for making sure we have fair assessments and making sure that people know what the process is for how we value property. And if they do believe that they're overassessed, we do a lot of outreach so people understand what the next process is to ensure that they know how they can be properly assessed, which is the appeal process. So we do a lot of public outreach. We do it to the public for just citizens, residents, business owners, but we also do a lot of realtor groups. We did a lot of writing to different magazines. I've written for the Michigan Association of Realtors for probably 20 plus years. I sell in Bryan, we were talking about the old Oakland Press office building in Pontiac. I used to be a writer for Oakland Press 20 plus years ago for their Commercial Ink magazine. So we've both been around a long time. But one of the reasons we still serve in assessing is to serve the public. So we're really honored to be here today.
I won't be too long. I'm Bryan Paris. I oversee the residential valuation group in Ferndale. So you may have seen me around town. I often serve at the local board of review, which is the part of the appeal process that all citizens have their due process rights to challenge the valuations we come up with. My background in assessment administration deals a lot with appeals. So for about 10 years, I was on our appeals team, handling small claims matters and then facilitating entire tribunal matters as well. So I'll distribute my card, my contact information. Actually, the handout has all of the leadership team's contact information in it. If you ever have a question about the appeal process for yourself or one of your neighbors, we are happy to assist people, walk them through that process. So thank you very much for having us tonight. We really enjoy these public engagement opportunities.
This next slide, we just want you to know that we do have a mission and vision at Oakland County, like a lot of organizations do. And it's really just to make sure we're collaborating, trying to be real transparent, ethical, honest, and really engage with the communities. At Oakland County Equalization, we're a branch of that administration. We are providing taxable values and generating taxes for each municipality, but also one of the things we're doing in our division is, again, we're ensuring assessment uniformity among all the classes of property, real property and personal property. We do process splits and combinations as they relate to the statute for the Land Division Act. We do apportionment of local tax rates, that's those millage rates. I'm getting ready to go to the October 11th meeting for our Board of Commissioners for the Finance Committee. I'll be presenting the tax rates there and then taking on to the Board of Commissioners evening meeting in front of all of them. As I mentioned, we do contract for 32 and a half basic communities because I do City of Novi still, which they do have somebody that they're investing in to be their next assessor. And we do strive to provide excellent customer service. And if you go to the next slide, as I mentioned, we are striving to do the best service we can for all of our communities, and we do take that a very serious role. I'm not going to really dwell on that, but if you go to the next one, These are all the different communities that are shaded in the darker green that we provide service to. So if you ever have any questions on any of the properties in those communities, you can reach out to any of our people and ask questions. All the information is available at our office. We can send assessment records to the owners on any of these properties for free, and that's why I encourage everybody should get a copy of their assessment record, valuation statement, and see exactly how the property is valued. The sketch, how it's measured, that's a big driver of valuation, the land size, as well as the valuation numbers of how we come up with the numbers. Everybody should have that just to make sure it's accurate, and if it's not, they should bring it to our attention. Those are the ones we do, but all of the communities in Oakland County, we do the equalization for. And when you look at assessing and equalization, it's kind of like accounting and the auditor. Equalization is kind of the auditor status. So we make sure everything's being uniformly and equitably valued in all of the communities throughout Oakland County. And we are kind of unique in that status that we do both assessing and equalization in Oakland County. If you go to the next slide, the one thing also for assessors in Michigan is just like private appraisers have to conform to certain ethics provisions, Michigan is very unique is that we have to comply to the same standards of ethics, which is what's called the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. Michigan mandates that document that all private appraisers have to comply with it. Every Michigan assessor that signs an assessment roll is mandated by the State Tax Commission, which is our higher authority that certifies Michigan assessors in Michigan. And years ago, when USPAP came out was required by federal licensing and then enacted by state licensing, Michigan said, well, you have to adhere to the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice for all licensed and certified real estate appraisers, not only in Michigan, but all states. If you're going to do any real estate related transaction work or federal related transaction work, Michigan took it upon themselves to say if you're going to assign any assessment roles, all assessors have to as well. Well, we at Oakland County Equalization went even a step farther and said all of our staff members have to take USPAP. So everybody in our office takes these classes so that they know what we have to as assessors have to comply with and adhere to as far as ethics. So we take ethics extremely diligently. Next slide. We also take the quality of the work we do seriously, and this was something we started within the last 60 days. We've always asked people for suggestions. We've always asked them for criticisms. If we're doing a good job, we don't need to be told that. It's nice to hear every now and again, but we don't really need that. But if we're not doing something or there's something that could be done better, we do want to know. So one of the things we put on our website, on our front page, was a citizen suggestion, almost like a suggestion box. It's a suggestion form. People can go in there and fill out this form, and they can upload documents and give us suggestions of how to improve what we're doing. It's almost like the old days when you walked into a municipality office and said, here's a survey, how are we doing? But this is electronic. You can get your assessment record for your house, and if you have an appraisal and it's got different measurements on the house from somebody else that's a certified appraiser, you can upload that and give it to us and say, the garage is measured differently, the house is measured differently, I don't have, this kind of a bathroom count. They can upload that directly to us. The difference though is with a lot of suggestion forms and things that come in, this is automatically anonymous. So if a community thinks we're not doing a good job, but maybe they're a little fearful of sending an email or something to us, this comes in anonymous unless they put their name and email address in. So if somebody thinks that we could do better and they want to submit something, this comes in totally anonymous. Now there's a catch-22. If they want feedback, I can't give them feedback if they don't put in their name and email. So if they want us to contact them back, they do have to fill out their name and email address. But we instituted this because we want as much feedback, criticism, ideas that we could get. Because when I was at Novi and Auburn Hills previously, some of the maps we put online, some of the reports we generated, some of the improvements we made were done from citizens. Palm Beach County in Florida, their equalization office, I know their staff real well down there through organizational involvement. they do a lot of community outreach and a lot of citizen support groups that have helped shape their quality of services. And a lot of it is because of the community involvement they've had. And this is one of the areas I stole the idea when I was at Novi, Auburn Hills prior, and some of those things that we're putting in here. So I give them credit. So I give credit where credit's due. A friend of mine, Mike Pratt down there, implemented it, so we stole it. And we'll steal other things that work. So that's something we implemented. And again, if you know somebody that is afraid to come in or they work during the day and they can't make, the call or email, that's a great area to give a suggestion. To give you just some basic terms to understand, we wanted to give you just some fundamental terms on the next slide. Starting off, we've got a big tax calendar we go by. It's written in statute. But when we talk to people, sometimes they don't understand dates. The real hardcore dates you really need to understand is for valuation purposes, when people get their assessment notice and they're trying to figure out why is my value different in my mind versus your mind, the first thing they need to understand is December 31st is always tax day in Michigan. So if the property's under construction, or if there was a loss, damage to the property, sometimes our disagreement is because of tax day. Like I had Mulligan's Golf Dome in Auburn Hills that got destroyed by winter conditions of January 15th. On tax day, it was up and running. There was nothing I could do about the value the next year because it was okay on tax day, because the damage occurred after tax day. So a lot of times the disagreement isn't the value of the property, it has to do with when it's valued. So when we're looking at new construction, we're looking at when things are done, when a fire occurred, sometimes it has to do with that sliding scale of time. So when you get your assessment notice in 2024, which we're working on now, it's going to be based on December 31, 2023. I was talking to somebody while we were eating, then we'll send out an assessment notice in February that'll talk about what your value is going to be for taxes in 2024. Everybody's going to get one. By law, we only have to send it out if there's an increase in your assessment. That's under the Truth in Taxation Act. The laws of natural justice say you got to be notified and you have an opportunity to be heard. That's what the March Quarter Review is for. We send them out on every property, even if your value goes down. So what we also do is we also do a lot of public speaking. How to understand your assessment notice, what it means, how to appeal, what information you could take to the March Quarter Review. And it'll tell you exactly what your assessed value was before, what your taxable value was before the 2023 year, and what it is in the 2024 year proposed. Then there's a couple other dates there, the May 31st and July 31st. Those are just appeal dates, whether you have a residential or non-residential property. And then throughout the year, we're out usually just inspecting properties, measuring properties, answering people's questions if they have discrepancies in measurements or property record information, and we're always working to the next tax day. I mean, there's a lot of other things we do throughout the year, but those are the main dates. The next slide. True cash value is a question that often comes up. That just basically means market value. What it doesn't mean is it's not half of the sale price of the property, because we don't chase sales. Because somebody could pay higher, or they could pay a lot higher than a property's worth because they're not knowledgeable about a property sale. But they could also not know much about the property, or they could know too much or more than what somebody else knows about their own property. Or there could be duress in a sale. So they could pay less than a property's worth. So we have to figure out what that value is based on, just like a private appraiser. So it's unconstitutional for us to chase the sale price. Now, they could still go to the Board of Review and ask the local Board of Review to consider the sale price as evidence of value, but we can't. We have to look at all the different sales in the area. And that's why when somebody calls us and says, I'm looking at buying a property, and I see that it's assessed for $150,000 right now, but I'm thinking about paying $350 or $380 because there's no supply in the market. But you have it assessed for $150. What do you think next year's taxable value will be? Well, what we don't say is take half the sale price. There's some assessors out there that might say that. We don't say that because that's going to scare off a lot of buyers, because the buyers, they've got to escrow taxes, and we don't chase sales. And I say that because if somebody were buying a property and overpaying for a property in today's market because there's no inventory, we don't chase sales, meaning our assessed value is what we really think it's worth. So if we think it's worth 150 and there's no like omitted property that's not on the record, if they've been working with a broker and they've looked at our assessment records and there's no chance of omitted property, next year it really should only go up by what the market has done. So maybe 150,000 plus or minus whatever the market's doing. It's not going to jump up no 25% just because the sale is selling for 25 or 30% more. And I say that because I do get calls from brokers that say, I just lost a deal in whatever community because that's what the assessor said, take half the sale price. So we're also out there trying to educate assessors, don't let your staff say this, because you're killing deals for brokers who are killing themselves to make deals. It's not really our responsibility, but I think it's our responsibility morally, not maybe professionally. They've got a hard enough job trying to do it. Okay? Same thing with, and I bring that up because also in construction, new construction, it's going to be worth whatever it is. It's not, cost may not equal value, right? Whatever the property is worth is what it's going to be valued at. Okay? At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Bryan for the rest of the terms. Any questions on true cash value? Because again, I've had brokers in this market who are selling above market value. It's not half the sale price. Whatever that assessed value is today, whatever they can assume for market value change.
I suspect there may be more questions once we get.
Okay, more terms. So true cash value is the going sales price of the property, the usual selling price. In Michigan, we work in half dollars. We have assessed value, which is 50% of value. So assessed value would be say your house is appraised for a true cash value of 300, your assessed value is 150. State equalized value, usually it is your assessed value, but state equalized value is arrived at after there are a couple of levels of oversight of the assessor's work. So first the properties go through the board of review, where all the property owners have the opportunity to make a challenge to that value that the assessor came up with. And then county equalization is performed. And the task of county equalization is to ensure that all of the various classes of property are equitably and fairly assessed at 50% of value. The final part of equalization is the state performing its review of both the assessor and the county equalization department's work. If the county or the state finds that there's an error and properties are not uniformly assessed at 50%, they can apply what's called a factor. It's a multiplier of some number to bring that figure up to 50. It happens very rarely, but it has happened on occasion. Cap value. This is something that came about with Proposal A. So Proposal A created, we used to just have assessed value. Proposal A was a shift of funding to help the schools. It created capped and taxable value. So in the year following a transfer, the assessed value for that year establishes a taxable value, and it's always the same figure. So if the property is valued at $300,000 true cash, sorry, I'll speak up. The cap value, it is the year-over-year formula that determines what your tax liability is. So the year following a transfer, your assessed value creates a new taxable value. If your property is valued at a true cash of 300, you'll have an assessed value of 150 in that year one. You'll also have a taxable value of 150. In year 2, that's when the capped value formula comes into play. It takes the prior year's taxable value minus any losses times the rate of inflation. Let me back up. A loss would be like a physical removal of a real improvement to the property. So say you demolish your garage, that value comes off. So it's prior year taxable minus losses times the rate of inflation, and then we have to add in anything that you physically add to the property. So let's say you build a new garage, that value comes back on. The inflation rate multiplier, that part of that formula, that is a measurement of the consumer price index. Its growth from one year to the next. The state produces an annual bulletin that tells us how much taxable values increase in the absence of an uncapping. Taxable value, I got a little ahead of myself, but it is the figure upon which your tax liability is based. In year 1, it's always equal to the assessed value. Year 1 meaning the year following a transfer. In year 2, we have to follow that formula. So we have to consider in each year's new calculation of the taxable value, was there an addition? Was there a demolition? Did the property sell? Another element of Proposal A is that your taxable value can never exceed your state equalized value. So when we have a downturn in the market like we did in 2008, assessed values just started plummeting for a series of years, and you'll see later in the presentation what happened to the community's assessed and taxable value. It went for a pretty deep dive, and it has rebounded, and Ferndale rebounded more quickly than many other communities, and I think that has largely to do with not only the investment in this community, but the number of transfers of real estate that you have, because a transfer of real estate triggers that uncapping pop-up effect where the next year's assessed value establishes a new taxable basis. And we'll see later in these slides how Proposal A, while it benefits people who stay in their home year after year, creates affordability, it is very unfriendly to newcomers to your community, especially in a market that is appreciating quite rapidly. Your taxes are calculated based on a pretty simple formula. You take your taxable value times the appropriate millage rate, you divide that millage rate by 1,000, and the product is what you pay in taxes each year. I think there are 2 school districts in Ferndale, Ferndale Schools, Hazel Park Schools. So to determine your millage rate, you have to know a few things. What community are you in? What school district are you in? And what exemptions are you entitled to? Is it your principal residence, or is it not your principal residence? Is it a rental, or is it some kind of commercial property?
Go back to one slide. Does anybody have questions about the terms?
Proposal A, I touched on that a little bit. It is a constitutional amendment. It was voted in by the voters in 1994. It changed the ways the schools are funded. It increased our sales tax rate. It established those new types of value, the capped and taxable value. Prior to Proposal A, you just paid based upon your state equalized value and how it changed each year. So if the market went up 20%, you would have a pretty steep increase in your annual tax liability. The protections or the affordable aspect of Proposal A is that it limits the growth in your taxable value from one year to the next. If you don't do any physical additions or improvements to your property, your taxable value cannot increase more than 5%. And while Proposal A has been in place since 1994, this year, 2023, 1995 was the first year it was in effect. This year, 2023, was the first time we've ever hit the 5% ceiling in Proposal A. So real inflation this year was 7.9%, but we didn't experience that on our increased tax liability. It was capped at 5% because of this provision in the law. If a,
That is the rate of inflation of 5%.
So yeah, you know, since 1995, we've never come close. Usually inflation's around 2.5%, 2.3%. There's a slide later in the presentation that kind of gives some quick stats on the IRM. The Headlee Amendment. So this is a constitutional amendment from 1978. It's kind of similar to Proposal A in that it provides for affordability for property owners, but it is not applicable to individual properties. It is applicable to the millage rates that are applied to all of the properties in the community. And I think a lot of people get confused on that point. Prop A is personal and specific to each one of your properties, but Headlee is specific to the millage rate, the amount charged to all properties in the community. And what Headlee says is that the community can collect no more money than the rate of inflation on existing properties' appreciated growth. The exception to that is new construction. So you can have new construction and you can bring in more revenue, but things like uncappings, pop-ups, they're actually detrimental to the tax rate, because if you have a significant number of uncappings that pushes your revenue far above just what the rate of inflation is, then that rate of taxation has to get rolled back. And as I said earlier, Ferndale is a very active community in terms of transfers. And this year I believe that Ferndale and Oak Park were the only two communities in Oakland County that actually experienced a rollback.
So just for clarity, the Headlee only applies to the city operating fund, not the other funds that are received through taxation.
I believe all taxing jurisdictions are impacted by Headlee, but debt is not. I'm not an expert in that regard. The expert in our office is Shannon Moore, but not just city operating, but all taxing jurisdictions. And I think the only exclusion there is debt.
So, basically what you're saying is, because I've had this conversation with Shannon. So all of our millages are subject to the Headlee rollback, with the exception of what would be our Coon Drain millage, which is a debt-related millage. So everything else is going to be subject to Headlee in the rollback, but that one piece is not.
So even the zoo, the DIA, all of that is subject to the rollback?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Are they subject individually, or is it?
Yeah, they're different taxing jurisdictions, so you can have different rollbacks within those different taxing jurisdictions.
Thank you.
Can you talk briefly about the tension between Prop A and Headlee? I know you're going to get into more detail on Headlee, so I just want to compare and contrast those two things.
I'm not quite sure how to answer that because they kind of work in concert. It's kind of like macro. If the market's doing quite well and you have a lot of transfers, then there's going to be pain on the individual new property owner level, because those people, the newcomers to the community, have substantially different tax obligations, much higher tax obligations than their neighbors, their peers that have very similar homes. And there's actually a slide that will appear later that demonstrates that quite well. I found two homes that were very similar on the same street, almost identical in size, we'll see it soon. But very similar, but very different tax bases. And if the market is doing quite well and there are a lot of pop-ups, a lot of transfers of property, then your Headlee rollback is exacerbated. The things that can offset that, though, are new construction, and Ferndale has had a good amount of new construction, some pretty healthy growth with its new mixed-use projects, its new neighborhoods. I think that that'll be discussed a little later by the city personnel.
And this was unique too. This was a unique year too, because before, and he's going to show it to you, the inflation rate multiplier is usually the same that you use for your millage reduction fraction formula as well as your cap rate formula. But again, this was different because your cap rate, your cap value formula, we use 5%, which was our ceiling, and you'll see in a minute. Here you got it. Your inflation rate multiplier, you're going to use 7.9%. So I mean, this was a very unique year too. And just to let you know, we're just lowly little assessors, so we don't get involved in the political commentary of what, you know, which is better, which is worse, what should you do with Proposal A, and what communities think or what citizens think. We just kind of do the values. So we can't really comment on what, you know, we do get asked a lot of questions about things of what we think about Proposal A and that, but you know, what we think if Proposal A, it really benefits people in the long run, we get that question. We have to stay and say no comment because we're just the valuers. So we have to be kind of careful to walk that line. But we've heard it from people that come in from California that love this because Proposition 13 out there is what Proposal A was mirrored after. And they can come in here and buy a ton of property and they don't mind it. And people that live in a house for a very long period of time, they have very low taxable values, but when they try to buy a property much smaller, because people have moved out of their property and there's only 2 people or 1 person left, they can't afford a smaller house because the taxes are too high. So there are some dilemmas. But he does have an illustration for that.
Sorry. So if you could go back to the last slide, what does IRM mean?
That's the inflation rate multiplier.
Okay.
That was one of the other terms we talked about.
Okay, and how is that percentage identified?
We're going to show you how we calculate that coming up.
Excellent, thank you.
And that's where he said that inflation rate multiplier, if that happens to be over 5%, you go with the lesser number. Yeah. But because 5% for the first time ever, it is lesser, we went with lesser than that. But this was the first year we ever had that. But watch out, where he's going to allude to what 2024 is going to be.
Yeah, that was an excellent point. This year is kind of unique in that there is some interplay between Prop A and Headlee in terms of the inflation rate multiplier that was used. For the uncappings, the Prop A aspect, those properties only went up, uncapped properties, they all, their taxable value was their assessed value in the next year. But for everybody that did not sell, your taxable value only went up 5% because of that ceiling in the law. The Headlee rollback, they used the true inflation rate multiplier of 7.9%. So that actually was very good for the communities on a tax collection basis because there was a little more wiggle room to avoid a rollback because those different figures were used. The major variables that impact the Headlee rollback, we've talked about pop-ups quite a bit. So that is when a property sells. You don't get the old owner's taxable value. This is probably a better way to explain it to you. When properties are listed for sale, you will often see what the taxes paid were by that previous owner. That means nothing. It doesn't mean a thing for the next owner. And unfortunately, a lot of realtors are not educated on this factor. Your tax liability as buyer is going to be based upon that next year's assessed value. So it is much, much better to pay attention to the assessed value of the property under that old owner and then try to gauge for yourself or enlist either your broker or an appraiser to kind of forecast what they think that whole neighborhood's value will move to in the next year based upon recent sales activity. That's a major flaw in the way that properties are listed, and we're doing a lot of outreach to educate salespeople so that their clients can be better advised and they don't have this horrible surprise. You hope they catch it at March Board of Review time to come in and challenge or at least talk to us to be prepared. But often they don't realize what has happened until their mortgage escrow is analyzed and they find out that there was a shortage in their escrow and it did not cover the tax liability in the next year. You'd be surprised by how many calls we get with that specific scenario. You've made that call? You've made it? You have a question?
I just had I think, so you don't really chase sales price But if the general trend is the sales prices aren't going up, then that would mean that your assessed value is gonna go up, like, so you're saying you don't chase sales price, like if there's a one-off.
Yeah,
But
we
if-
don't chase sales on one property and say, well, we're just gonna chase and put your value at that property sale.
Right.
But we analyze the whole mix.
But if your whole neighborhood, everyone's property values have gone up and there's a lot of churning going on, then in general, the sales price those sales prices will drive the overall valuation.
Yeah, we value in mass. So you probably are more familiar if you've bought and sold real estate, individual valuation, where an appraiser comes to your home and just looks at your property and just picks 3 to 5 comparables and bases the value upon those things. We assign all properties to different neighborhoods, and a neighborhood could be geographic or it could be on some kind of physical characteristic. Like, let's say in a community like Ferndale, or any other of the Royal Oak area communities where most of the housing stock is older, but you have a new home here and there. So those new homes might be in their own neighborhood set apart from that geographic area. Or we can just value them with everything that is geographically around and make other kinds of adjustments to the valuation. But no, we don't. A neighborhood moves in mass. So unless we find with a sale that there's something that was not on the record that should have been on the record, like let's say somebody finished the basement, added a bathroom on the second floor, didn't pull any permits, but then in the sales material we find that to be the case, not only will that property move with the market increase, but we have to pick up those physical amenities that should have been on the record. So the neighborhood might move 15%, the house might move 20%. So pop-ups, they are one variable that impacts the Headlee rollback figure. Another is CPI, so we talked a little bit about that, how the actual inflation this year was 7.9%. That's very, very high. That helped communities to not have a rollback. When CPI is quite low, you are more likely to have a rollback.
What's CPI again?
Consumer price index. So that data is translated, becomes the inflation rate multiplier. So if the consumer price index shows a 2% increase, the multiplier that we have reflects that it's 1.02.
We could probably work with the time restrictor, we could probably move.
Yeah, we can just move through. This packet is available for all of you. This is just some interesting information, some insight from other organizations on Prop A and Headlee and how it interacts with community revenues. The same here. This is the demonstration of how Prop A is a great thing for people that stay in their homes to make homes affordable, and how it's not so great for the newcomer to the community. So these two houses are on the same street. They are both about 920 square feet. The one, property A, was built in 1950, the one next to it 1952. There are just very minute differences between these two properties. The one on the right, you probably can't tell, but it has either a brick or a stone exterior, and it has a 2-car garage, where the one next door has a 1-car garage. But I say how similar they are because the one on the left, property A, has an assessed value of $92,840. The one on the right, property B, $100,900. The guy in property A has lived there since 1994 at least, and he has a taxable value of $40,450. So assessed value is 1/2 of true cash value. We say this property is worth about $186,000 roughly, property A. He pays taxes as though the property is worth $80,900. So I'm taking his taxable value here and multiplying by the 2. So worth $186,000, pays taxes as though it's worth $80,900. You take it against the millage rate for Ferndale schools with a principal residence exemption, which is $49.21. You divide. It's easier to divide this by 1,000, but you could divide that by 1,000. Take 40.45 times 49.21. He pays $1,990 in taxes for all of the services that he enjoys in Ferndale. This is his new neighbor who purchased February 25th, 2022. His new neighbor paid $215,000. We have him valued as though he's worth about $201,000, so he's not overassessed. He should not come to our board, but he very well may. We welcome his call because we're glad to talk about this stuff. So paid $215,000, valued at about $202,000. Because Prop A says that your assessed value in the year following your transfer is the same as your taxable value, that's what he pays taxes on. He pays taxes as though the property is worth $202,000. You take that against the same exact millage rate, the 49.21, and this guy pays almost $5,000 for the same city services as property A, but because he is new to the community and the law says in the year following transfer, the assessed value establishes the new taxable value, he has a very different tax obligation to reside in Ferndale and enjoy all the same city services. So great for people that stay in their home and there's appreciation in the market. Not as friendly to the newcomers to the community. There can be a resetting effect, like during the Great Recession, where these people, there's more parity between them. Like, let's say that number one's valued at $186,000. He pays taxes as though it's about $80,000. Hopefully we never have an instance where both of these houses both become worth $75,000, but that would create a resetting effect where both of their taxable values are then 1/2 of 75.
What would trigger that resetting? Is there a threshold?
Well, the law says that your taxable value can never exceed your assessed value. So when there's a steep decline in market value, it can have the effect of dropping below everyone's taxable value. And we saw that, I don't recall the figure exactly, but many people, their taxable values were actually reset and they experienced less taxation as a result of the Great Recession. Any other questions on that? These are just some fast stats on Proposal A since its inception after 1994. So this year was the first time ever we met that 5% ceiling. The lowest inflation rate multiplier was in 2010 when it was actually less than 1. The overall average inflation rate multiplier since the inception of Proposal A is 2.33. The Consumer Price Index data is used to calculate the IRM for 2023 property taxes. And then this is just a little statement that there was a different rate used in the Headlee inflation rate multiplier than there was in the Proposal A. You can move on to the next one. This is the data that is used to calculate the inflation rate multiplier. So the U.S. Department of Labor, Bureau of Labor and Statistics measures the prices of goods and services, and they track that, and the difference between one year to the next provides the rate of change that is used in the inflation rate multiplier. The state publishes a bulletin each year that tells us what the IRM is to be used, and all communities throughout the state, an individual local assessor cannot adopt their own inflation rate multiplier. This slide basically just talks about how we realize how important it is for us to stay on top of these calculations, and we actually track the movement of the CPI from one month to the next to assist our community partners, which are your either elected or your city manager official, the treasurer, those folks that are responsible for creating and maintaining budgets in your communities. This is a snapshot or a picture of the tracking sheet that we use, and this sheet's a little dated because it ends with July. We do have August's figure, and we are projecting that the IRM is probably going to be around 5% again this year. a little different from last year because last year we had true inflation at 7.9%, and that helped all the communities with the rollback. But this year, we won't have the same effect. We will have probably the same 5% that is used in the Headlee rollback scenario, as well as the cap value formula that impacts all of those properties on an individual basis.
So that's important for you right now. So if you haven't, I mean, right now, if you're doing your budgets, so you haven't added any physical additions or you haven't taken any physical property away from your property, and you're just looking at your assessed value here and your taxable values here, looking at your assessment notice, unless your assessed value is going to drop below your taxable value, your taxable value is going to probably go up at least 5% next year. Again, unless there's something you've added to, we're looking at another 5% for next year. And that's across the state.
All right, the next slide closes this section out. So first, I just want to give a hand for Michael and Bryan for coming out. And I'll give you a bigger hand if you're willing to stick around through our portion, because it'll be complimentary. So real quick, I think we can take a 5-minute recess, and that will allow us to take a break, stretch, and then we will separate. So that was a lot of information. What I want to be able to do is apply some of that locally, and we'll walk you through City of Ferndale's tax base, our taxable value, and we'll see if we can localize some of this. But meanwhile, if you could pause real quick, we'll come back in about 5 minutes. Thanks, everyone.
Bathrooms in the back, there's still more food. If you want more food, please eat.
Michael and Bryan both left cards up here too if you want. Please help yourself.
maintenance.
All right, everybody, we are going to reconvene for part 2 of tonight's presentations. For this portion of the presentation, I'll be walking us through most of the slides, but at one point I'm going to invite Roger Caruso, the city's Community and Economic Development Director, to talk a little bit about development. We referred to the new construction in the previous meeting. So he'll talk a little bit about that new development. We have a couple of case studies we'll walk you through on that slide. So I always want to begin on the city's portion, just always resetting to our mission, our objective. And so that is the objective statement from the resolution and that we talked about at the first meeting. So if we ever feel like we're getting lost, this is where we call back to and come back to the mission. Those key focus points around that mission is understanding property tax implications. That is very much what the focus of tonight's meeting is about, to kick that off. And once we understand that, we can understand the implications of staffing levels and government service levels. We'll be speaking more to that when we meet about the budget process later on in the month. And then finally, forwarding progress on the 2022 Facilities Task Force recommendations that we'll be looking into beginning October 14th at the tour of the fire station. And then at the following meeting when the Facilities Task Force will be coming to give a presentation, some members of that. Next, please. So I'd like to start big picture, 10,000 square foot, and that's really, first let's begin with Ferndale's tax base. In your packet, you'll see some tables from the Oakland County packet. You can refer back to some tables. You'll see a list of communities and their assessed values and taxable values. That's all important because what's behind those values is your tax base composition. So 75% of Ferndale's community property, our tax base, is really based on all of our residential properties. So that's the leading factor for us. Next. Beginning with assessed value, we've established we understand what assessed value is. Now that's, so Ferndale's assessed value, this is the combined valuation of all of our property, is about $1.3 billion. You can see the percentage distribution on the right margin of that. Next slide, please.
Wait, there's a question.
Oh,
Joe.
oh, sorry, Quinn.
Can you define the difference between like commercial real and commercial personal?
Commercial real would be the actual facility, the property itself. Personal would be some of the instruments or equipment that supports the facility.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. This is just a different way to visualize that. So that's the giant Pac-Man is our residential, about 75%. And then we're going to look into the taxable value, which is the next slide. So if you remember, the residential, the assessed value was about 1.1. This is 645 million. So you can see the distinction there between the assessed value and the taxable value. The taxable value is what we really care about in terms of taxation.
Hey, Joe, can you come like 1 foot closer to me? Thank you, perfect.
I'm blind now.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. I'll just give a perpetual wink. All right, so we also talked about the recession, and this is a nice bar chart that really walks you through 2007, which is the year really before the recession really began. And you can see the journey we've taken from 2007 to 2023, and there's a couple highlights. So you have an early peak value. So our collective tax base in Ferndale was about $650 million in 2008 or 9, I think. You look at we bottomed out at about 492,000. So if you think about that, we lost substantial amounts of community taxable value. The worth of our property in the community declined significantly following the recession. So in that trough was about 2013-14 is when we really bottomed out, and that really stayed flat at a bottom in 2015. So if you bought a house during those years, you probably got a pretty good deal on that house. You probably had a lower purchase point, but your taxable value, as we've established, also reduced. So your city services, you might be getting a benefit of city services, but you got a really good deal in 2015. So you started at a pretty low point for those city services. You can see we start to recover in 2016, and that's incrementally increasing until we actually finally get back to 2007 valuation for our tax base in 2020. So it took about 12 years to get back to where we were in 2007. And since then, you can see the gradual increase, and as we've pointed out, you maxed out for the first time at the 5% cap, and you can kind of see how that impacted, that's reflected in the valuation. You can see the significant increase there, and that is unlike the other previous increases, right? They're not incremental there, that's a big jump. Any questions on this slide before we move on? Okay, next slide. Our friends at the county helped put this together. So I asked them, we get a lot of questions, observations that Ferndale has generally flipped most of its properties. And so I wanted to establish kind of first, how many properties do we have? Now that, to be fair, I think this is all property, not residential, correct? These are all properties in Ferndale, or is it just residential?
That's an error, it's all real property.
All real property. So that includes our industrial properties and our commercial properties. So your total parcels is around 10,000. Number of transfers, that's when we're talking about the actual sale or transfer of a property. So if a property was sold. Now what we don't know, and this is a big distinction to make, we don't know if these are properties that flipped multiple times, because that would count as a transfer. And we've also learned that taxable value is only going to equalize to the assessed value once. So for that house in 1994, once it sells in 2023, that's going to be really the big growth opportunity. If they flip it and sell it again a year later, there's not going to be much of a distinction between the assessed value and taxable value. Does that make sense? So that we don't know what's behind those transfers, but those are the actual numbers of properties. And so you can see the percentage. So the blue bar chart kind of just shows the real property number, and then the transfers are in relation to that. So over the decade, we've transferred a bit of property. but we haven't flipped the community. And I don't mean to be tongue-in-cheek about that, but we do get that observation because we do see a lot of yard signs, for sure.
Joe, can you explain the transfer again? Transfers on there?
What is the transfer?
Yeah.
It's just the transfer of property, correct? A change of sale, if you will.
Okay.
All right, next slide. So how do we quantify the value of that, the change in value? Now this is a tough slide for me, so you can check out your tables. The left column, let's begin with the left column. That's the transfer of taxable value. So that's really, of all those properties that uncapped and they uncapped, what did they add? What new revenues did they add back? What's the increment? And so that's really down here. So I'll just do this one as an example. This bottom line, and you can see this in your packet. It's about $34 million in valuation added to the taxable value. That's the increment. That's the change of uncapped property. And so we add that to the overall tax base, and that's the impact on the city's tax base. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
So is this to show that even though we've had, say, 700 transfers, the impact overall is small?
The impact, the impact is significant, but the impact is not. You can see it's not transforming the community's overall taxable value. I think that's the illustration point. There's a proportion there just for context. And that's important context moving forward. Next slide, please. So, we want to bolster our tax growth, and that's really why we do have a community and economic development director. One of the ways I'd love to do that is bolstering our industrial district. Industrial properties bring some good valuation. That would be a good strategy. Ferndale does have an industrial district. It's not as robust as some of our neighbors. And if you look in some of the tables that compare the communities, you'll see Royal Oak has significant industrial, and that's going to help bolster some of their tax-based compositions. That's one strategy. Commercial redevelopment, we've seen a lot of commercial redevelopment that we alluded to, and then residential redevelopment. So I want to walk through some of those redevelopment projects at scale. I'm not speaking as much about the individual single-family home. We're talking about the projects that you've probably noticed that took a developer. Next slide, please.
So bolstering industrial and commercial would that lighten the tax burden on residential?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And industrial is really, only 3% of our tax base is flagged as industrial, as we saw in the chart. So I think that is a good opportunity for us. Commercial, I don't think there's as much growth to be gained out of the commercial side of things. But an industrial strategy is also consistent with the city's master land use plan objectives.
And is it true that Prop A only applies to residential, whereas Headlee applies to other?
We're getting a no. Prop A and Headlee are applied to all property, real property. So let's take a closer look. I'm going to invite Roger Caruso up here, the city's Community and Economic Development Director, and he's going to walk you through redevelopment. You'll notice I also gave everyone an economic development handout. The first two tables are it should be 4 pages. Those are the case study examples for you to refer to. After that is really just a leave behind for you. It's an in-depth state packet on incentives. And Roger's going to walk you through 3 common incentives that we use, and they're pretty common for all cities.
Thank you, Joe. So I think the first thing to know, as my role as Community and Economic Development Director, there's community development, which is planning, building, code enforcement. There's also economic development. And as Economic Development Director, my goal is to increase the taxable value through the city through new construction or major rehabilitation of property. So we're going to walk you through 3 tools that we use in economic development that can help spur development. The first is brownfield redevelopment. The second is known as OPRA, Obsolete Property Rehabilitation Act. And the third is a neighborhood enterprise zone. And here's some examples. Brownfield 409 on 9, which we're going to go over. in Ferndale project. Also in your example, we have the Wilson Park Village. Obsolete property, I think we've done one, which is the St. James, the James Senior Homes. And neighborhood enterprise, we have not actually done one. We've had public hearings on 2 projects in what's mentioned as 1200 West 9 Mile. Brownfield redevelopments, they are tax increment financing, TIF. So what they do is they freeze the taxable value, investment is made, so maybe a new building is built, the taxable value goes up dramatically, or hopefully dramatically, the base still goes to the taxing jurisdictions, the increment is collected and given to the developer to do something. Generally, brownfields are for contamination, so soil contamination, obsolete buildings, asbestos remediation, things like that. And if not for a brownfield, the thought is that the project would be upside down, they won't be able to clean up the contaminated site, and it will remain the same way. So brownfields, a developer will pay the full taxes to the assessor. We then go ahead and collect the increment and usually give it back to them. Obsolete Property Rehabilitation Act, that one's different. The taxes are frozen at that time, the investment is made, and the developer will pay the original reduced taxable value, saving the increase in taxable value for a number of years, 1 to 12. And then neighborhood enterprise zones are a little bit different. The state sets the mill rate, so it's half of the average state mill rate. At this point, I think it's 52 mills for average state, so half is 26 mills. So a district is created on a parcel or many parcels, and going forward, they will only pay 26 mills for a period of time, saving the difference in mills there. So one is we collect the full taxes, we give some back. One is a freeze in that moment, and one is a reduction to half the state average for a developer. Next slide, please. So we're gonna give you a couple case studies, and I made a mistake, I realized, so I'll go through that. But first, these examples, they don't assume uncapping of any of the projects. So we'll go over Wilson Park Village. The numbers I'm gonna give you do not assume any of the homes uncap. For 40909, it does not assume the apartment building or associated development uncaps. This is where I made the mistake. For Wilson Park, I did assume, for both, I assumed there was a personal residential exemption, and I got that wrong. So for Wilson Park, I did assess 18 mills, and I shouldn't have. It would actually be lower. For 40909, it assumes it is non-homestead. The numbers in that one are correct, the 4th page, or the back of the 2nd page. But I'll go over that. It assumes a 1% climber on property value, so we don't get too aggressive, we just assume they steadily go up, and we use those numbers. It assumes a static millage rate. The millage rates change all the time depending on what the city's authorized in the taxing jurisdictions. And in a brownfield, we cannot capture city debt service, school district debt service, Detroit Zoo, or the Detroit DIA authority. And I'll give you an example. So if you go to your first page, you'll see Wilson Park Village. Next slide, please. So if you look at columns and rows, the columns are pre-development, so as it existed prior to redeveloping. Upon completion of construction, so the very first year after it was fully completed, and then a year after, it was assumed the brownfield would be repaid. So uncapped, I don't want to use the word uncapped, no more brownfield being paid, all money comes to the taxing jurisdictions. So the use before pre-development on Wilson Park Village was a 50,000 square foot vacant school building and turning into 28 single family homes. The assessed value at the time was 0, and I'm gonna assume it probably had an assessed value, the taxable value was 0. It probably had an assessed value, no, not even that. All right, assessed value and taxable value was 0. Upon completion, all of the property with all the single family homes was anticipated to be worth $4.45 million. And then through the 1% climber from 2020 to 2028, we assume it's now worth 5.534. It should be done, these are estimates in the brownfield plan. The actual end value is what the assessor decides when they actually go vertical and they check out the price. So those are just assumptions in the plan. The taxes generated prior to development were 0. And then here's where we get the new taxes under this scenario, which I got the numbers wrong, I used the 18 mils, but we're gonna go with it, was $302,000. $49,656 will go to city debt service, school debt service, DIA, and zoo. So there is some tax revenue, even through a brownfield, that we collect. $252,000, though, is collected and then remitted to the developer until we hit the amount we agreed to redevelop them. So again, non-capturable city debt, school debt, zoo, and DIA authority. So if you look at your handout, back of page 1, if you look at the bottom right, you'll see it, I marked 375. It's actually, I think, 257. It should be probably 257. The mill rate won't be 67.76. It's minus 18, so it's 49.76. Regardless of that, you'll see what the taxing jurisdictions will collect once it is out of the brownfield and completed, how much revenue it generated. So again, it started at 0, and then by 2028, hopefully it's repaid, generating about $257,000 for the taxing jurisdictions. It's a lot of information. I think I should stop there. Does anybody have any questions?
That assumes no turnover in that neighborhood, right?
Correct. It assumes no uncapping, no sales. It also assumes that they're all homestead.
Right, and then the brownfield payback, is that consistent?
Is that what?
You said the brownfield will be repaid by 2028?
So that was the original assumptions, right? When we make a plan, we're assuming the future. So the brownfield plan assumes that. So we come to a conclusion on how much will we develop the developer. Let's say it's $2 million, and we can refund them $252. You're talking 8 years it would be repaid, something close to that. If the taxable value is much higher, they'll get repaid much quicker, the brownfield will end sooner, and the taxing jurisdictions will get their money sooner, okay? If they're not performing, we were wrong on the assessed value, the economy tanked, the houses are worth half the value, we will collect less money to give the developer. But in a brownfield, there are 2 governors. There's the maximum amount we'll give you, but there's also the number of years we'll refund you. So if we're only paying you half of what's generated, because it's generating half of what we thought, once you hit the 10 years, we stop refunding, and the developer would have eaten that cost. So there are 2 governors with brownfields. Any other questions? What's that?
I just want to make a quick summary point. So, because I get these questions quite a bit in the city manager's office, and so I think that it's beneficial. So, want to make sure to make the point that this is a great project, but for this project, we wouldn't have 28 single-family homes in the neighborhood. So that's good that it activated a use that was otherwise vacant. So that's what we want. We want new homeowners. The perception, I think, would be that the city is going to get all of that after the development once it starts performing. So point 1, the city currently only gets the $50,000. And that $50,000 isn't solely the city's, it's spread across the few taxing jurisdictions. And then point 2, after the brownfield is done on your sheet, and this will be available for the public too, the city is one of many taxing jurisdictions who are going to collect off of that value. So that $252,000 that we see there, that won't be all the cities at the end of the day. It's going to be distributed across many. And so, you know, as Roger's sheet shows you, the city's operating millage is worth about 17% of that. So we only capture 17% of that. The other 83% are distributed to other taxing jurisdictions or services. And then you notice, I want to point out the city operated voting too. That's what's being investigated right now. So that would collect about 6% or $24,000 if the millage is still intact as it is today. If it's not, then that's zeroed out, and then that's just redistributed to other jurisdictions. Any question on those 2 points? Okay, so this was a single family example.
Yeah, and I'll just correct one thing. It started with a taxable value of 0. So the $49,000 we're collecting, the city collects it, we're the assessor. We don't get any of that. We remit it to city debt, school debt, zoo, and DIA authority because it was 0. You'll see another example. Where we'll get some is when it resets to 252, when the brownfield expires. I'll show you another example that's a combo. Can you go to the next one? All right, so 40909, you might be familiar with 40909, the apartment complex sort of across City Hall a little bit to the east. So that already had a value when they came in, there was buildings there. So pre-development, it was a complex of underutilized contaminated parcels. And after construction, it was 114,000 square foot, 4-story mixed use with 5,500 square feet of commercial and 127 market rate apartments. But it had an assessed value of 641. We can't touch that, that's the base. That assessed value, once we get the taxes generated, have to go to all the taxing jurisdictions as it originally did based on this formula. So it originally had a taxable value of 641,000. When it got completed, in first full year of construction, the value was 7.3 million. We assume if the brownfield stays on course, it'll be paid back by 2033. At a 1% climber, it's 8.4 million. So the taxes generated was originally 43,461. As the brownfield's active, 43,461 go to the original taxing jurisdictions that you'll see on the back of this page. So everybody gets a little bit. The non-capturable 82,245 is the city debt, school debt, zoo, and DIA. So they are paying some new taxes because we can't capture those. But we can capture the rest of it, which is 374,000. So if you go to your page 2 of the 40909, bottom right hand, you will see 574,000. Those add up, I hope they add up, 474, should, to 574, unless I did the number wrong. But the point being is, when it has a taxable value, that money doesn't go away. It still gets remitted to the taxing jurisdictions. There will be an increment that cannot be captured. The new taxes will be captured to pay the brownfield back, and then once it resets, it comes to all the taxing jurisdictions. Any questions on this one?
So between the two, the brownfield, I know you said the duration is like 1 to 12 years. So was it, Wilson Park got a 7-year and 40909 got a 12-year? I guess what sets that?
Yeah, so an Oprah is 1 to 12 years. A brownfield is 1 to 25 in total, I think. Might be 30.
The city sets the incentive, this is how many years, or is that a separate grant program?
Yeah, we set it. So what they'll do is they'll come up with a brownfield plan that includes all their contamination. So let's pretend it's $3.4 million to fix the contamination, and we're going to pay for all of it. We think we should pay for all of it. What's going to drive the years is how much taxes it can generate. So if it can only generate 100,000, because it's just not that much of an investment, if the maximum we can do is 20 years, 20 times 100,000 is 2 million, we can't give them 3.4, we can only give them 2. So what drives that is the total amount we're going to reimburse, how much it can pay incremental, and we can give to them. So let's pretend, they want a brownfield for 600,000. They're doing some great investment, and it's going to generate 300,000 more a year. It would just be a 2-year brownfield to pay the 600,000.
Without going into great detail, can you just kind of touch on incentives and how that also impacts the project?
Incentives and how that impacts a project. What do you next?
We're going to address that. Okay.
Hold on, let's see if we address that.
Okay.
Next slide might be me. Yeah, so redevelopment, it does, when you're giving incentives like a brownfield, it does have some delayed revenue impacts. We don't see the money right up front. So I think in total we have 19 brownfields by number. Not all are active. When they expire, they keep the number. We might have 12 active brownfields. Ferndale project, I think, 40909, Wilson Park, Parkdale, this property or the property next door, Sophie or something. I'm going through them all now. So if you see a project like that, you think, oh, the city must be flush in cash. Not for a while until we pay back that brownfield to clean up the contamination. So most substantial redevelopment projects require a mix of incentives, some capital stack, a brownfield, an Oprah, an NEZ. I don't want to say most, but many projects with contamination will absolutely require that. And incentives often defer property tax revenue increases. So we take a short-term pain We have to provide those people services, police, fire, whatever it might be. But hopefully there's a day when it pays itself back, and then we get to enjoy that. Again, incentives are if not for. If not for this incentive, it doesn't build. If it doesn't build, it stays the same way. We all lose out.
So, Roger, you say hopefully. So it's no guarantee.
Which part?
The fact that, this is hard for me, that we're going to recover and make money from.
Well, if we're doing
Recover the brownfield.
No, I would say it always will, because if a brownfield, if a developer fronts the money to clean up a contaminated site, but then never builds, and we never give them any money back, we still have a clean site, right? So that's a good thing. If a developer seeks a brownfield, cleans up the site, and it doesn't generate as much revenue because they just didn't expand as much as they wanted, we'll see an increment, because it'll always expire. Once it expires, then we get to enjoy it. But new construction and rehab is really good, because we get to have that value. And then performing better than we thought is better because it pays off the brownfield sooner, and then we get the money back sooner, or we get a new tax revenue sooner.
Thank you.
Is there one more slide? I'll turn this one over to Joe. Is there any other questions before I turn it over to Joe? About incentives, brownfields, NEZs, Oprahs?
I do have a question. So can we get a list of when those brownfields are expiring? And I assume the additional taxes are built into the city income forecast? Is that?
So the question was asked, I should have been repeating questions. Can we get a list of when the brownfields expire, and you assume that's been baked into the future budgets?
Correct.
We can create a list. Right now, we've hired a company to go through each of them to make sure we're refunding correctly and doing everything correctly. So I'm working on that. So yes, we can do that. I don't know if it's been plugged into the budget in future years, laddered out or thought about, but Joe can answer that. Thank you.
So the city does a 3-year budget. So if we do have a brownfield fund, our brownfield fund is a specific special revenue fund. So during the budget process, we do correlate that. We will look at the inventory list, and if we can see a projected termination date to the plan, we can bake that projected taxable value into the budget. And we can then make some assumptions about shifting that tax benefit back into the general fund off of the brownfield plan. At this time, Roger we will be able to provide you some general sketch of an inventory of our plans. Most of our plans and projects recently have been done in the last 8 to 9 years. So most of them are probably 20 to 25 years out from the time that they were done. So really we're looking at 2035 is when we can start seeing a lot of the projects you're seeing out there today come back to the general fund.
I just think, Joe, for this group, being aware of if there is some sort of tax windfall coming within the time period that we are considering, it's important to know that.
I completely understand that. Yep, I get your point. We can help that. So, why do we do this? That's a common conversation about city incentives and development projects. And, Roger made some great points. The but-for is a really good case because but for the incentive, the development may not occur. And when we do developments, we want to facilitate property improvements. Ferndale, like many other of our neighbors, we're an older urban built-out city. And with that comes older urban problems, especially environmentally. I think we, as a society, have come a long way on the environmental stewardship side. We have different property standards than we did back in the 30s. And so because of that, we have a lot of brownfields, as do our neighbors. So Ferndale's not alone in that. The Metro Detroit region does. So environmental cleanup, getting property improvements. We want property improvements. And then, of course, facilitating city council strategic objectives and master land use priorities. So one incentivized project that is an example is the Shepherd House. Shepherd House has a tax incentive. It has many layers of incentives. in order to get that project. That project is a 100% affordable housing project for seniors, LGBTQ plus citizens. So that project has several layers of funding. It's from a nonprofit developer. It has state tax incentives, federal tax incentives for low-income housing tax credits. It also has some county incentives, and then the city's contribution is a payment in lieu of taxes. So they will have a lower tax rate for us until the project is realized, and that's, I think, about a 45-year generational project. So that is, what that does is it helps this development stay affordable for its residents for 45 years, and that's locked. So a real quick recap. I do want to leave time for additional questions or conversation. Proposal A, what we've heard today, this is the part I just want to clarify for everyone. Proposal A, when we talk about that, we're talking about the individual property. We're talking about controlling the valuation of the individual property. Headlee is really talking about the tax base. And the tax base, the Headlee override is going to be a function of how the market performs and how the tax base composition is. So we have examples of that through the county, but those two things do work in tandem. So that's the point. Prop A, individual parcel, Headlee, override community tax base. Next. And the cost of living pressure. We talk a lot about cost of living and affordability. You know, we've established that Proposal A is really good for long-term homeowners, but for Ferndale, which is, you know, a majority demographic of 25 to 34-year-olds, we probably have some new homeowners, and those new homeowners are going to be experiencing Ferndale a little bit differently, right? So they're paying for the same services as you are if you've been in your home for 25 years, but their taxes are dramatically different. So the burden is actually shifted onto the new homeowner, which is a problem for a city with our demographics, for sure. Next. And one of my anecdotal observations is I think Proposal A and Headlee assume dynamics, social dynamics stay the same. Well, they don't. You know, I know that family size in our region, across the state, or across the nation, that's different. You're seeing less families of 5. You just are. You're seeing families later. I'm one of them. I've had kids later in life. So the timing of families has changed. That, I think, you know, when those passed, there might have been an assumption that these social tendencies are just locked in, and they haven't been. You have other tendencies to relocate. So you might not have, there's less of a tendency to realize the long-term benefit of that long-term homeownership because job availability is different, how we work is different. There's all kinds of different factors that go into choosing whether to stay for 20 years to reap that long-term tax benefit, right? So those things have changed. As renting and homeownership also have changed. You know, not everybody seeks to buy their first home at 25 anymore. So you're starting to see first-time homeowners later into their 30s, even into their 40s. So that's a bit different too. And then of course, new technology and new markets, short-term rentals. You have new investment properties that are a whole different proposition. Those investment properties are probably, you know, they're not going to be paying the pre, so they're going to be paying a different tax rate. But I think the general point is the social dynamics have changed. And I think the Proposal A and Headlee, the way they work, are fixed in terms of their logic. So I will close with that. I think that is the last slide. If you could advance. Yes, it is. So I did leave some time. Are there any questions and discussion? I think our Oakland County folks, yes, they are still here for additional questions if anyone has any, or if you want to correct anything I got wrong.
Maybe we start with the table discussions, and I don't know if I don't have any formal meeting or fail, but maybe you could reflect on what you heard today, what made sense, what you learned, and what questions you still have. Be so kind, Kyle, to join Dale and Kim.
Yeah, that's not it. Could you turn the projector off so that Kyle's not wondering?
Appreciate it. This is.
Okay. I used to following
proximity to these brownfield things, and we're not gonna see the benefits until long.
Right. Because the brownfields are 20, 25 years.
So why do we do that?
And that's the city, I think, looking still at that. Like, they built the neighborhood for 30 houses, even if it takes 10 years to get that money back.
Yeah.
The next 100 years, you're still gonna
Oh,
see
good.
that.
I'm glad Roger's joining this table.
We got the man here.
Can you use Ferndale Traffic Building to explain brownfield, like start to finish? Like I'm just confused on what it is, and like how it works, and how a developer gets incentivized.
Subject. From last year. If we're doing heavy like brownfield projects, and we're not gonna see that money 25 years down the road, it's not good.
It doesn't. So generally what happens, the developer will find it right? They like it a lot, but it has petroleum contamination. Okay? The developer already has a difficult time making the project work with land costs, road costs, sewer costs, water costs, construction costs, interest rates, the risk they take, how much money they're gonna make, and then what the rent will do. So they have a difficult time making that pencil. Then you throw on, let's say, $3 million in contamination, projects that they can't make it happen. It just doesn't rent for contamination. So they come to the city, and most developers know what they do. They come to the city and say, I have a site that's contaminated, and I need some assistance. So we start engaging them. We ask them for pro formas, write down your numbers, tell us what we've got, have something. Usually we know if it's a contaminated site, we know there was a gas station there, a dry cleaner, whatever it might be, we already know that. So we know it's gonna have something. We start negotiating, talking lightly, we say, this is a good project, I want you to do it. They engage a company to do a brownfield. So it's a brownfield plan.
Okay, the developer gets another company to work with the city
To work with them to create a brownfield.
Okay.
And that brownfield plan will explain the history of the property, the difficulty of the property, what they want to do with the property. It's a whole plan. And with that is a big table that maps out all the years. 2021, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And there's a bunch of numbers kind of like that I showed you.
Yeah.
So they lay out all these numbers. And really the driver of it is what is going to be the assessed value of the property once you build it.
Okay.
So 28 homes are going for 40,000. They do the calculation. They see what it's worth. And then at the bottom of that, they find out what they can capture. If they can't capture those four things, so they run their tax report on those 28 homes, and they cross out the four they can't take, do anything with, and they're left with something they can capture. Let's pretend that's $200,000. They capture $200,000. The project's going to cost $3 million. The first thing is we don't have to agree to $3 million. We will only agree to the minimum necessary to get to the new project.
And you say Ferndale, like,
The city
the city of Ferndale is the one fronting this money.
No, we don't fund, the developer funds them. When I say we, I don't, at this point, city staff, we will agree, now we don't agree because we have a council around, but we will acknowledge the investment fees. So if they can still make the project work, but we need $2 million, we'll give them $2 million. So that's where the pro forma comes in. So let's pretend of the run, right? They said it has to cost $1 million, but they can make the project work, they'll absorb $1 million. We're not going to agree. We're going to say we're giving you $2 million. I keep saying we're getting reimbursed. We would reimburse like
That's their tax value goes up. They pay my $300,000 tax bill still at the end of the year, but the city gives it back. So it's not the fronting of the money.
we don't cut them a check. I say we give them, what I mean is we collect it and give it back. a portion
Basically,
back.
you get a discount on your taxes.
Okay. To help you pay for that.
The developer will make the investment in property, clean up the site
With the city of Ferndale.
by themselves. They will clean it up. They will send us bills and we will roll this up. When they complete their project, we will certify, all right, you did spend $2 million. Now next year, they give me $200,000 in taxes. I have to keep 30 of it because I can't pay 30 of it in these tax jurisdictions. You pay the 200, I'll give 30 of those 4 jurisdictions, and I'll give you back 170. Now instead of us owing you $2 million, we only owe you
2 million minus whatever we get.
170. Then the next year they pay another $200,000 in taxes. We can't give them 30 because that's the 4 we can't. We collect it all, we give it back to them. So they work it off by paying their taxes.
But that's still, so in the short term, so the short term pain, so we build a neighborhood with 40 homes. We have to maintain all those roads, we have to give them all city services. We're not getting the money until, but once we hit that 10 years, then we get their full tax dollars and we get all that.
Correct. And the amount of services is going to be relatively small. You know, a new road like Wilson Park is going to last 20 years, so we don't really have an investment there. Will some people call the police? Sure, there'll be an incremental police call. Will they visit the library incrementally? But generally, hopefully, it's a low impact.
But then there's also the trade-off, like do citizens do investment?
Spending money in restaurants,
So that you're trickle down benefit from.
correct. So in that moment, a brownfield is an investment. It's like a college degree. You're investing, but you're not getting money back at that point. So, you know, whatever that plan is, however long, however much they're generating, we work it off and keep paying them back with their own tax revenue they generated. And once we pay off that $2 million, then it's everything just be taxed in jurisdiction. That's normal. We don't give any money from the general fund. We can only give you what you give us. Right? So you bring it to us, we give it back to you. So we're not fronting any money, we're saying something, you can argue, well, you're paying for some services, just don't do it. So in that example, if we don't do it, and it can't become a contamination, if it really can't financially, in 20 years, we're still going to have a vacant field or school site. So nothing has changed. So you have to make these short-term decisions for the benefit of the long run. I don't want to hog this because
No, that's great. Yeah. And we get a lot of confusion about, I mean, like, we get a lot of assumptions, I would say, about these topics. From people who don't really know how it works. And I think not only our city staff, but also, you know, well-known residents like Dale are kind of called upon in public settings to, you know, speak to this, or to, you know, we confront these kind of misunderstandings, and it's like, all right, how do I explain this? You know, nobody's on the take, you know what I mean? These terms that you're using, this isn't a Netflix show, like, you know what I mean? It's actually way more complex and frankly boring than you all understand. You know what I mean?
There's a common misconception that people will come in and say, can I have $1 million, and we say, sure, you can have it. Everything is done by the performer. So every developer deserves a return on investment. Nobody's going to do it for 0% return and take the risk. A typical developer, the risk associated with about 10%. So if they come in and say they like $1 million, I say, show me your performa, let's run through the numbers. And they give me the performa, and they say, I'm making a 40% return. I said, I'm going to make 50. You would say, have a good day. Go make your $1 million.
That would be giving $1 million so they have to pay that back.
They would front the money into the project. They would generate the taxes. They would pay the taxes. They would collect the taxes, and we would put something back to them. But they paid us first.
Okay, that's what I.
So we're not partnering with them. We don't front them the $1 million, whatever number it is, 245,000, 2.2 million, it doesn't matter what it is. We don't front them any general fund. You have to perform, pay your taxes, and we'll give you the portion. So the dock is brought up as well. The difference between the docks is that with that assumption was a 4th and 5th story building that was going to pay taxes, and apartments that were going to pay taxes. Because that hasn't been performed yet, they're not making what they thought they were going to make. So that developer made this massive investment and thought, okay, I'm going to get paid back in 20 years. But if he doesn't know the things that generate the tax revenue, he's holding the cost. That's where it makes sense. Not generating money. Sure, but he did all the work. He cleaned up the site, he rented the parking deck, he did all that stuff. And they say, every year we'll give you a portion of what you give us. And he says, here's 20,000. We say, okay, fine, here's 15.
Sorry, I have probably a very stupid question. So, if you just give that money back,
It's all state law. So in that incentive, we can't just not do it.
Okay.
We have to actually take receipt of it,
Okay.
put it on our books, and then give it back.
Okay. Okay. And so remind me again, using the example of like the 200,000, the 200,000, and we were 30, and back in 70. Remind me